Jed Ironstone found the black woman teaching his mute son 9 languages in the schoolroom, where dust motes hung like suspended secrets in the afternoon light. The boy who had not spoken a word in 2 years was counting in what sounded like French, then Spanish, then something that might have been German. Yet's rifle hung loose in his grip. He had come running from the corral when Buck mentioned hearing foreign voices from the house. Strangers meant trouble. Strangers in his home meant. Worse, the woman stood between him and Tobias. Her chin lifted. Her hands stayed steady at her sides. She wore a travel-worn blue dress that had seen better days and better roads. Her skin held the deep brown of polished walnut. Her eyes held something fiercer than fear. Tobias looked up from the slate where numbers were written in symbols Jed could not read. The boy's face carried light Jed had not seen since before the fever took his mother. Since before the silence settled over him like winter snow that never melted. The woman spoke first. Her voice carried the soft music of somewhere far from Montana territory. "I am Eva Beaumont, your mail-order bride." She reached into her travel bag, pulled out a letter worn soft from handling. The paper looked official enough. The handwriting looked nothing like his own. Jed lowered the rifle, set it against the doorframe. Tobias had moved closer to the woman. The boy's small hand touched her skirt like she might disappear if he let go. "I never wrote for a bride. The letter bears your name, your address. Details about your son needing a mother's care." Ava's fingers smoothed the paper. "I traveled 800 miles based on these words." Jed took the letter. Read words that sounded like something he might have written if he had been desperate enough to send for a stranger. The desperation was real. The letter was not his doing. Tobias tugged at Ava's skirt. When she looked down, he pointed at the slate. He spoke again. More numbers and more languages Jed had never heard on the Montana plains. How many languages does he know now? 9. He learns like drinking water, like he was born thirsty for words. The boy had been born thirsty for everything. Stories, songs, the sound of his mother's voice reading from books shipped all the way from Chicago. When the fever took her, it took his voice with her. "Where did you come from?" "New Orleans." "My family taught languages there. Before." Her hand found Tobias's shoulder. The boy leaned into her touch. "Before dangerous people decided we had learned too much for our own good." Jed folded the letter, handed it back. Ava's fingers brushed his when she took it. Her hands were soft but marked with old calluses. Teacher's hands. "You ran from trouble. Trouble found my family first. I ran from what was left." The afternoon. Light was fading. Soon the hands would come in for supper. Soon word would spread through the valley that Jed Ironstone had a black woman in his house teaching his boy foreign tongues. Soon choices would need making. Tobias spoke again, this time in English. His voice was rust and disused but clear as creek water. "Can Miss Eva stay for supper?" The first words in 2 years. Yet's throat closed around air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. He looked at Ava. She was watching Tobias with eyes that held tears she would not let fall. "You have nowhere else to go." "No, sir. I spent my last dollars getting here. The town won't take kindly to your presence." "Most towns don't." Jed picked up his rifle. The weight felt different now, like protection instead of threat. He thought of his son's voice, of the light in the boy's eyes, of the woman who had traveled 800 miles based on lies that somehow led to truth. "You can stay tonight. In the morning we figure what comes next." Eva nodded. Her relief was quiet, but complete, like she had been holding her breath for 800 miles and could finally let it go. Tobias clapped his hands, spoke something that sounded like celebration in a language Jed could not name. The boy ran to the kitchen. His footsteps echoed through the house like music. Ava began gathering the slates and books scattered across the table. Her movements were efficient, practiced, like she had packed up lessons quickly before. "Miss Beaumont," she looked up. "What kind of dangerous people?" Her hands stilled on the books. "The kind that burn schools. The kind that don't believe people like me should know how to read, much less teach others to do the same." Outside, wind moved through the cottonwoods, carried the sound of cattle settling for the night, carried the sound of riders coming up the long drive to the house. Puck's voice called from the yard. "Boss, we got company." Jed moved to the window. 3 riders sat their horses at the edge of the lamplight, spilling from the house. They wore the look of men who had traveled far and hard, who had business that could not wait for morning. Eva appeared at his shoulder. When she saw the riders, her face went pale as winter sky. "They found me." The riders turned their horses and disappeared into the gathering darkness like smoke pulled apart by wind. Eva's shoulders dropped. Her breath came out in a rush that fogged the window glass. False alarm? Maybe. Hard to tell in this light. Eva stepped back from the window. Her hands trembled against her skirt. "Men have been following me since Louisiana. Different men. Same purpose." Jed set his rifle by the door. The house felt smaller now. Like walls could not keep out what hunted in the dark. Tobias appeared in the kitchen doorway. He carried 3 plates balanced careful in his small hands. The boy had set the table without being asked, had found the good china his mother used for special occasions. The plates caught lamplight and threw it back golden and warm. They ate in silence broken only by Tobias speaking softly in languages that rolled off his tongue, natural as breathing. He would point at his food and name it in French, then Spanish, then something musical that might have been Italian. Eva responded in each language. Her pronunciation was flawless, her patience endless. Jed watched his son's face transform with each new word learned and remembered. After supper, Eva helped clear the dishes. She moved through the kitchen knowing where things belonged, finding rhythm with the space, making herself useful without making herself at home. Tobias followed her movements, asked questions in languages Jed could not understand. Eva answered each one. Sometimes she would laugh, a sound that made the house feel lighter than it had in 2 years. When the dishes were done, Jed sent the boy to bed. Tobias hugged Eva goodnight, whispered something in her ear that made her smile. Then he hugged his father and ran upstairs. The silence that settled between them was different from the one that had filled the house since his wife died. This silence held possibility, held questions that had no easy answers. Eva sat in the chair by the fire. The flames threw shadows across her face, made her look younger and older at the same time, made her look like someone who had seen too much but refused to let it break her. "Tell me about your family." Eva's hands stilled in her lap. She stared into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "My father owned a school in New Orleans, taught languages to children whose parents could afford such education. We lived well, had books, had respect." Her fingers traced patterns on her skirt. "We had what some people believed we had no right to possess." What changed? Nothing changed. That was the problem. We stayed successful while others wanted us to remember our place. Eva's jaw tightened. A group called themselves White Camellia decided to remind us. The fire crackled. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwoods, carried the sound of cattle shifting in the darkness, carried the weight of stories that ended in running. They came at night, burned the school first, then the house. My parents died trying to save the books. Eva's voice never wavered. My brother died trying to save them. Jed leaned forward. His elbows rested on his knees. His hands hung loose between them. "How did you get away?" "I was visiting my uncle in Baton Rouge. When I came home, there was nothing left but ash and stories no one wanted to tell." Eva looked at him then. Her eyes held depths he could not measure. "I have been running ever since." "Running to what?" Run into anywhere that might let me live, teach, breathe without looking over my shoulder. The next morning brought Mrs. Cordelia Hutchins to the front door. She arrived in her Sunday dress and her husband's wagon. Her face carried the particular flush of someone with confessions to make. Jed met her on the porch. Eva stayed inside. With Tobias, their voices carried through the window. Numbers in languages that sounded like prayers. Mrs. Hutchins twisted her handkerchief, looked everywhere but at Yet's face. When she finally spoke, her words tumbled out rushed and guilty. I wrote that letter, used your name and your address. Thought I was helping find Tobias a mother. Her hands wrung the handkerchief tighter. Never thought about who might answer. Never considered. Jed leaned against the porch rail. The wood was weathered smooth by seasons of wind and rain. Like patience carved into timber. You had no right. I know, I was wrong. But that boy needed someone. You needed someone. She stopped, started again. I never expected someone like her. Someone like her. Mrs. Hutchins glanced toward the window where Ava's voice could be heard speaking gentle French to Tobias, someone who would complicate things. She's teaching my son to talk again. She's teaching him to talk in languages decent people don't understand, making him different. Making you both targets. Jed straightened. His shadow fell across. Mrs. Hutchins, she stepped back. My son was dying inside his own silence. She brought him back. If that makes us targets, then we were already dead. Mrs. Hutchins climbed back into her wagon. Drove away without looking back. Dust rose behind her. Wheels settled on everything. Made the morning taste of endings. By noon, 3 more neighbors had found reasons to visit. They came with small gifts and large concerns. They spoke careful words about community standards, about what was best for everyone involved. Each conversation ended the same way, with Jed standing on his porch watching them leave, with Eva teaching Tobias at the kitchen table, with the space between what was right and what was acceptable growing wider than the valley itself. That evening, Buck knocked on the door. The foreman held his hat in weathered hands. His face carried news that tasted of trouble. Some of the boys are talking about the woman, about how long she's staying. Let them talk. Talking might turn into something else. Tommy Fletcher's been stirring things up. Says it's not natural. Says it will bring trouble to the ranch. Ava appeared in the doorway behind Jed. She had heard every word. Her face showed nothing. Her hands showed everything. Clenched tight against her sides. I can leave tonight. You're not leaving. The words came out harder than Jed intended. Buck raised an eyebrow. Eva stepped back. Boss, you sure about this path? Jed looked at his foreman. At Eva, at the golden light spilling from his house, where his son was reading in languages that opened the world instead of closing it. I'm sure she stays, Buck nodded. Put his hat back on. Walked back toward the bunkhouse where men were making choices that would change everything. Inside, Tobias was already asleep. Ava had left his door cracked open. Light from the hallway fell across his face. Made him look peaceful. Made him look like a boy who had found his voice and would not lose it again. Ava stood by the kitchen window. She watched the darkness beyond the glass. Watched for riders who might return with different intentions. You should have let me go. Where would you have gone? Somewhere else. Somewhere that wouldn't cost you everything. Jed moved to stand beside her. The window reflected their faces back to them. 2 people standing closer than they should. Further apart than they wanted to be. Everything I care about is under this roof. Eva turned to look at him. The space between them held the weight of words that could not be spoken. The weight of choices that would define them both. Outside, the wind picked up. Carried the scent of rain that might wash the dust away. Might settle the restless earth. Might bring clean air to breathe. Or might bring the storm that had been building since the moment she arrived. The strangers returned on the third morning. Ava saw them first from the kitchen window where she stood washing breakfast dishes. 3 men on horseback, dust rising behind them against the pale sky. Her hands went still in the soapy water. The plate she held slipped back beneath the surface. Tobias looked up from his slate where he was writing his name in Arabic script. "Miss Eva, what's wrong?" She dried her hands on her apron, moved away from the window. The light that came through the glass seemed dimmer now, colder. "Nothing. Sweet boy, keep practicing those letters." But her voice carried the weight of lies told to protect children. Tobias heard it. His pencil stopped moving. His eyes found hers. Eva went to her room, pulled her travel bag from under the bed. The same bag that had carried her 800 miles from everything she had ever known. The same bag that would carry her 800 miles further if necessary. She folded her spare dress, her few books, the daguerreotype of her family taken before the world decided they had learned too much. The faces in the picture smiled back at her, frozen in a moment when safety felt permanent. Footsteps on the stairs, Yet's voice calling her name. She closed the bag, sat on the bed, waited for him to find her packing for a journey she did not want to make. He appeared in the doorway, saw the bag, saw her hands folded in her lap. His face went hard as winter ground. "You're leaving. Those men are back. This time they'll want answers. Let them ask their questions." Ava stood, moved to the window that looked out over the valley. The land stretched wide and open. Room to breathe, room to belong, room she would never claim. "You don't understand what kind of men hunt people like me." Jed crossed the room, stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, feel the steadiness that anchored him to this place. "Then tell me." She turned. The space between them was smaller than propriety allowed, larger than her heart could stand. "They believe knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands, that teaching is rebellion, that people like me threaten the natural order by proving we can think." Her voice stayed level. Her eyes did not. "They killed my family for owning books. What do you think they'll do to you for protecting me?" The sound of horses in the yard, voices calling out, Buck's voice answering. The careful politeness of men conducting business that might turn ugly. Jed moved to the window. The 3 strangers sat their horses in the morning sun. They wore good clothes, clean clothes, not the rough gear of bounty hunters or hired guns. One of them dismounted, approached Buck with his hat in his hands, spoke words that carried respect rather than threat. Buck nodded, pointed toward the house. "They're asking permission to approach." "That's not how hunters behave." Eva joined him at the window, studied the men's faces, their posture, the way they waited for invitation instead of demanding entry. "Something's different." The dismounted man walked toward the house. His steps were measured, careful. He carried himself with dignity that spoke of education, of purposes that ran deeper than violence. Jed went downstairs. Eva followed. Tobias appeared in the kitchen doorway. He held his slate against his chest, protection made of wood and learning. The stranger knocked, waited. When Jed opened the door, the man removed his hat completely. His hair was silver. His face was weathered by years and worry. "Mr. Ironstone, I am Solomon Beaumont. I believe you have my niece." Ava's breath caught. Her hand found the doorframe, held tight to wood that suddenly seemed less solid than air. The man looked past Jed, saw Eva standing in the hallway. His face crumpled, reformed itself around joy too large for one expression to hold. "Evangeline," she moved then, ran to him, across the porch, let herself be caught in arms that smelled of pipe tobacco and printer's ink. Let herself remember what family felt like when it was not just memory. Solomon held her at arm's length, studied her face. His eyes traced the changes. That running had carved into her features. I thought you were dead. When I came back from Chicago and found the ashes. His voice carried the weight of months spent believing the worst. I have been looking everywhere. I thought I was the only one left. Almost. Your Aunt Ruth survived. She's in Denver now, safe. His hands gripped her shoulders. We hired these men to help find you. Pinkerton detectives. They've been tracking every mail-order bride inquiry from New Orleans to California. Ava looked back at the other two men. They had dismounted now, stood respectfully apart from the family reunion. Professional distance maintained even in moments of high emotion. Jed stepped onto the porch. His presence changed the air, made the space feel smaller, more charged with possibilities that had no names. You're welcome here, Mr. Beaumont. Your niece has been. He paused, searched for words that could hold the truth without breaking it. She's been a blessing to my family. Solomon studied Yet's face, saw something there that made his eyebrows rise. His glance moved between Eva and Jed, reading the story written in the careful distance they maintained. The way they did not quite look at each other. Tobias appeared at Ava's side. He tugged at her skirt. When she looked down, he spoke in perfect French. He wants to know if you have to leave now. Solomon's eyes widened. He knelt to Tobias's level, responded in French that was fluid but carried a different accent. The boy's face lit up. He launched into rapid Spanish. Solomon kept pace, switched to German when Tobias did. Then to something that sounded Eastern European. Finally to Arabic that made the old man laugh with delight. 9 languages? He learns faster than I can teach. Solomon stood. His face carried wonder mixed with concern. He looked at Eva, at Jed, at the boy who had become the bridge between them. How long have you been here? 3 days. And in 3 days you taught him this much? In 3 days she brought him back from silence. Yet's voice carried pride that had no business being there. No right to claim her accomplishments. He hadn't spoken in 2 years. One of the Pinkerton men approached. His face was grim. He spoke to Solomon in low tones that carried urgency. Words that made the old man's expression harden. Solomon turned back to Eva and Jed. The joy of reunion was still there, but it was shadowed now by knowledge that changed everything. There's more bad news. The men who killed your family. They've been tracking the Pinkertons, following them to find you. His hands found Ava's again. A man named Caleb Whitmore. He's 2 days behind us, maybe less. Ava's face went pale. She stepped backward, hit the porch rail, gripped it with hands that had gone white at the knuckles. He's the one who lit the match, who stood in our yard and watched everything burn. The wind picked up, moved through the cottonwoods with a sound that spoke of storms coming, of changes that could not be stopped or turned. Aside, Jed moved closer to Eva, not touching, not claiming, just present, just solid ground in a world that had started shaking again. Tobias looked between the adults. Read the fear in their faces. Spoke in English that was clear and determined. Miss Eva can't leave. She promised to teach me Mandarin. Solomon smiled despite everything, knelt down again. Spoke to his grandnephew in gentle tones. What if I told you Miss Eva could teach you Mandarin somewhere safer? Somewhere with your Aunt Ruth and me? Tobias considered this, his small face serious with the weight of choices he was too young to understand. Finally he shook his head. Home is here. Miss Eva belongs here too. The boy took Ava's hand, took Yet's hand, joined them together with the simple logic of someone who had found what he needed and would not let it go. Ava looked down at their joined hands, at the child who had claimed her, at the man whose touch made her believe in futures she had given up hoping for. In the distance, dust rose on the horizon, more riders coming, moving fast toward a reckoning that had been 2 years in the making. The dust cloud grew larger, 5 riders this time, moving with purpose that left no room for negotiation. Eva watched from the kitchen window while Jed and Solomon planned in voices that carried the weight of men who had run out of options. The Pinkerton detectives checked their weapons, not for violence, for the promise of it. The threat that might prevent bloodshed by promising worse consequences for those who sought it. Buck appeared at the back door. His face was grim. Behind him stood 6 ranch hands. Men who had worked this land long enough to call it home. Men who would not let strangers burn what they had helped build. Tommy Fletcher rode out an hour ago, took his gear. Buck's jaw was tight. Said he wouldn't fight other white men over a colored woman. Jed nodded. 1 less gun in the fight. 1 less man to trust when trust meant the difference between living and dying. Tobias sat at the kitchen table. His slate was covered with Cherokee symbols Ava had taught him that morning. He copied each character with careful precision, building a language that might save them all. The Cherokee symbols. Can you teach them to the others? Eva looked at the slate. At the boy who absorbed knowledge faster than most men absorbed whiskey. At the symbols that represented more than letters. That represented alliance. He learns everything. Remembers everything. The tribal scouts use these markers. If Tobias can write messages they can read, Jed knelt beside his son. Would you like to help, boy? Tobias nodded. His small face was serious with the weight of adult responsibilities. He began writing quickly. Symbols that would carry meaning across cultures, across the spaces between hope and desperation. Solomon joined them at the table. His educated fingers traced the Cherokee letters. His face showed recognition. I taught linguistics at university before the war. These symbols follow a pattern, a logic. He looked at Tobias with something close to awe. How many can you write? All of them. Miss Eva says Cherokee is the most beautiful written language, because it was made by one man who wanted his people to keep their stories. The old professor's eyes grew bright. He pulled paper from his coat, began writing alongside Tobias. 2 generations of teachers working together, building bridges with ink and understanding. One of the Pinkerton men entered the kitchen. His name was Hayes. His face carried the particular weariness of someone who had seen too much justice delayed. Whitmore stopped about a mile out. He's got 4 men with him. They're making camp. Hayes accepted the coffee Eva poured without asking. He wants to wait until dark. Thinks shadows will give him advantage. What does he want? Hayes looked at Eva. His expression was careful, professional, the look of someone delivering news that would change everything, dead or alive, was the phrase he used. Said he had promises to keep to dead friends. Ava's hand stilled on the coffee pot. She had known this moment would come, had run toward it for 2 years. Now it sat in her kitchen drinking coffee and planning her funeral. I can go to him, end this before anyone else gets hurt. Every man in the room spoke at once. Their voices overlapped in refusal, in anger at the suggestion, in something that sounded dangerously close to love. Yet's voice cut through the others, quiet, final. No, you don't understand what he'll do. What he's capable of. I understand that you brought my son back from the dead. I understand that you made this house feel like home again. Yet's hands rested flat on the table, steady as stone. I understand that some things are worth fighting for. Solomon reached across the table, took Ava's hands in his weathered ones. His touch carried the weight of family, of promises made to the dead. Your father died protecting what he built. Your mother died protecting what she taught. You will not die surrendering what they gave their lives to preserve. The second Pinkerton detective entered the kitchen. His name was Morrison. He carried maps marked with positions, elevations, sight lines that would matter when the shooting started. There's a box canyon about 2 miles north, single entrance. If we can lead them there, he spread the map on the table. The Cherokee Scouts know it. Call it the place where foolish men learn wisdom. Tobias looked up from his writing. His young voice cut through the adult planning with the clarity of someone too innocent to doubt. Little Fox knows that canyon. He taught me the Cherokee words for trap. Little Fox was the son of the tribal scout who brought news to the ranch. A boy near Tobias's age who had become his friend despite speaking different languages. Despite coming from different worlds. Ava looked at the symbols Tobias had written. At the careful letters that represented more than communication. That represented alliance between people who understood what it meant to be hunted for being different. You want to use me as bait. We want to use their hatred as a trap. Solomon's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades teaching strategy to young minds. They expect you to run. They expect us to hide you. They don't expect us to choose the ground where this ends. The afternoon stretched long. The sun moved across the sky with the slowness of time that had weight. That carried the pressure of choices that could not be unmade. Ava sat with Tobias in the front room. He practiced his languages while she mended a tear in his shirt. Normal tasks in an afternoon that held nothing normal. Nothing certain except the coming darkness. Miss Eva? Yes, sweet boy? Are you scared? Ava's needle paused in the fabric. She looked at the child who had given her purpose. Who had reminded her why teaching mattered. Why knowledge was worth preserving, even when preservation came at such cost. I'm scared of losing what I've found here. Will you stay, after tonight? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications she could not name, with futures that depended on surviving the next few hours. If I can stay, if your father wants me to stay. Tobias smiled. The expression transformed his face. Made him look older and younger at the same time. Made him look like someone who understood love better than the adults around him. Papa wants you to stay. He just doesn't know how to say it yet. The sun touched the mountains, painted the sky in colors that spoke of endings, of beginnings, of the space between day and night where anything was possible. Jed appeared in the doorway. His face was set, determined. He had made peace with whatever was coming. It's time. Eva kissed Tobias's forehead, whispered something in Cherokee that made him nod solemnly. Then she followed Jed out into the gathering darkness where 5 men waited to finish what they had started in New Orleans, where justice and vengeance would meet in a box canyon and decide which was stronger. The horses moved quietly through the night. Their hoofbeats were muffled by dust that had settled thick from the day's heat. Eva rode between Jed and Solomon, protected by men who had chosen her survival over their own safety. Behind them, Whitmore and his men followed the trail she had left, obvious signs that spoke of desperate flight, of prey that had finally been cornered. They rode toward the canyon where Cherokee wisdom would meet Louisiana hatred, where the past would be settled so the future could begin. The canyon walls rose on either side of them like stone prayers reaching toward stars that had witnessed too much suffering. Ava rode at the front now, alone, making herself visible to the men who followed, making herself the prize they had traveled so far to claim. Behind her, hidden in the shadows cast by moonlight and stone, Jed waited with the Pinkerton detectives. Solomon crouched behind a boulder with his rifle steady in hands that had held chalk and books more often than weapons. The Cherokee scouts had positioned themselves at the canyon's rim, silent as the spirits their ancestors believed watched over places where justice was decided. Ava's horse moved forward with careful steps. Each hoofbeat echoed off the canyon walls, multiplied into sounds that spoke of approach, of surrender, of prey that had finally stopped running. Whitmore's voice carried from the canyon mouth, rough with the satisfaction of a hunt completed. Evangeline Beaumont, you led us quite a chase. She turned her horse to face him. 5 men, on horseback. Their faces were hard with purpose that had consumed 2 years of their lives. that had driven them across states and territories to reach this moment. Mr. Whitmore. You remember me. Good. I was hoping you'd remember who burned your precious school. Who made sure your family learned there. Final lesson. Ava's hand stayed steady on the reins. Her voice carried no tremor when she spoke. No fear that would give him satisfaction. I remember everything. Whitmore dismounted. His boots crunched on the canyon floor. The sound was sharp in the enclosed space. Definitive. He pulled rope from his saddlebags. Began fashioning a noose with movements that spoke of practice. Your daddy thought books made him equal to white men. Your mama thought teaching made her respectable. They died knowing better. They died knowing they were right. The words hung in the air between them, truth spoken without apology. Without the fear he had expected, had counted on. Whitmore's face darkened. He stepped closer. The rope swung from his hands with the weight of intentions that had no mercy in them. You're going to hang just like they should have. But first you're going to tell me where you hid the gold. Ava's eyes narrowed. What gold? Don't play ignorant. Your family had money. Had property. Had things that belonged to better people. His voice rose, echoed off the canyon walls. We know you took it when you ran. The accusation carried the weight of lies told to justify theft, to transform murder into something that could be called justice by men who had forgotten what the word meant. We had what we earned, what we built, what you burned, what you stole. The word cracked through the canyon like a whip, like lightning that illuminated the truth behind 2 years of hunting, behind the determination that had driven 5 men across half the country. They had not come for justice. They had come for gold that existed only in their imagination, for wealth they believed must be hidden somewhere, for treasure that would make their crimes profitable instead of merely satisfying. Eva began to laugh. The sound was bitter as winter wind, sharp as broken glass. You killed my family for gold that never existed. You burned everything we built for money we never had. Whitmore's face went pale, then red, then something beyond color. Something that spoke of rage that had no bottom. No limit. You're lying. I'm telling you what you already know. What you've known since you started this hunt. What you can't admit, because admitting it would mean you're nothing but a murderer who killed innocent people for nothing. The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Even the stones seemed to lean forward to hear what would come next. Whitmore raised the rope, took another step toward Eva. His movements were quick with fury that had found its target. Then you'll hang for nothing too. The gunshot came from the canyon rim, not aimed to kill. Aimed to warn, to announce that the trap had been sprung, that the hunters had become the hunted. Yet's voice echoed from the shadows, strong, final. Let her go, Whitmore. This is none of your concern, rancher. Everything that happens to her is my concern. Jed stepped into the moonlight. His rifle was aimed. His stance was steady. Behind him, the Pinkerton detectives emerged from their hiding places. Solomon appeared from behind his boulder. The Cherokee scouts showed themselves on the canyon rim. 8 men against 5. Justice against vengeance. Law against the absence of it. Whitmore looked around the canyon. Saw the trap closing. Saw the end of a hunt that had consumed too much of his life. His men shifted nervously in their saddles. Their hands moved toward their weapons. You're outnumbered, Whitmore. Your choice is surrender or something worse. I didn't come this far to surrender to men who protect criminals. The only criminal in this canyon is you. Hayes, the senior Pinkerton detective, stepped forward. His badge caught the moonlight. Threw it back with the authority of federal law. Caleb Whitmore. You're under arrest for the murders of Augustus Beaumont, Celeste Beaumont, and Marcus Beaumont, for the destruction of property, for inciting violence across state lines. Whitmore's hand moved toward his gun. Stopped when rifle bolts clicked around the canyon. When he realized that drawing would mean dying. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Eva dismounted, walked toward the man who had haunted her dreams for 2 years, who had driven her across the country seeking safety that had always been one step ahead of his hatred. She stopped just beyond arm's reach, close enough to see his face clearly, to look into eyes that held nothing but emptiness dressed up as purpose. It's over because I'm not running anymore. It's over because I found people who value what you tried to destroy. It's over because hate is smaller than love, and you never understood that. Whitmore spat into the dust. His men were already raising their hands, already surrendering to the inevitable, already choosing life over loyalty to a cause that had proven itself hollow. You think you've won something. I think I've found something. Home, family, purpose. Eva's voice was steady as stone, sure as sunrise. Things you can't take away because you never understood what they were. The Pinkerton detectives moved in, applied handcuffs with professional efficiency, read charges that would see Whitmore tried in federal court, that would see justice served for crimes that had gone unpunished too long. As they led him away, Whitmore turned back one final time. His face was twisted with the rage of someone who had lost everything to his own hatred. This won't change anything. There are others. There will always be others. Eva watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the canyon mouth. Watched the end of the nightmare that had shaped 2 years of her life, that had driven her from everything she knew toward everything she needed. Jed approached her slowly. His rifle was lowered. His face was soft with relief and something deeper. Something that had no name but had been growing in the spaces between words since the day she arrived. It's finished. Yes. They stood together in the canyon where justice had been served, where the past had been settled so the future could begin. The silence between them was different now, clear of the fear that had shadowed every conversation, open to possibilities that had been unthinkable when danger walked so close behind. Eva, she turned to look at him. His face was serious, intent, the face of a man who had made a decision that would change everything. I have something to ask you. He knelt in the dust of the canyon floor, in the place where her freedom had been won, where their future had been made possible. Marry me. The words echoed off the canyon walls, multiplied into promises that filled the enclosed space, that rose toward stars that had witnessed suffering and now witnessed love. Eva looked down at the man who had protected her, who had chosen her over safety, who had made her believe in homes that could not be burned, in families that could not be destroyed. Yes, the word was simple, complete. It held everything that needed saying, everything that had been growing in the silence between them since the moment he found her teaching his son to speak in languages that opened the world. They would marry the next day, in the presence of family and community, in the light of a sun that would rise on a future neither of them had dared to imagine when the past held such power over their lives. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Light spilled across the valley floor and touched everything with gold. The air carried the scent of wildflowers that had bloomed overnight, of possibilities that had taken root in soil that had known too much sorrow. Eva stood in the bedroom that had become hers by choice rather than circumstance. The mirror reflected a woman who looked different than the one who had arrived 5 days ago. This woman's eyes held peace instead of constant vigilance. Her shoulders carried hope instead of the weight of running. Mrs. Hutchins knocked softly on the door. She entered carrying a dress of ivory silk that had belonged to Yet's first wife. The fabric whispered against her hands, caught light and held it. She would have wanted you to wear this, would have wanted someone to love Jed and Tobias the way they deserve. Eva touched the silk. The dress was beautiful, simple, made for a woman who understood that true elegance needed no ornamentation. Are you certain? I'm certain that you brought life back to this house, that you gave that boy his voice, that you made Jed remember how to smile. Mrs. Hutchins's eyes were bright with tears that held joy instead of sorrow. "I'm certain that I was wrong about many things and right about the one that mattered most." Ava let herself be helped into the dress. Let other women from the valley arrive to braid flowers into her hair, to fuss over details that mattered only, because they transformed an ordinary morning into something sacred. Tobias appeared in the doorway. He wore his Sunday clothes and carried himself with the dignity of someone performing an important duty. In his hands was a ring that had belonged to his mother, a simple band of gold that caught the morning light. "Papa said to give you this. Said Mama would want you to have it." Ava knelt to the boy's level, took the ring with hands that trembled only slightly. The gold was warm from his small fingers, warm with the weight of promises made and kept. "What? Do you think of having a new mama?" Tobias considered the question with the seriousness of someone who had learned that words mattered, that choices had consequences that rippled through lives and changed them forever. "I think you were always my mama. We just needed to make it official." He hugged her then, fierce and complete. The embrace of someone who had found what he needed and would not let it go. Eva held him close, breathed in the scent of soap and sunshine that clung to his hair. The ceremony was held in the front yard under cottonwood trees that provided shade and shelter. The circuit judge had arrived at dawn, a man accustomed to performing weddings in places where churches were scarce and love was precious. Solomon walked Eva across the grass that had been worn smooth by the feet of wedding guests. He wore his best suit. His face carried pride that had been earned through loss and found again through love. He placed her hand in Yet's with the solemnity of someone passing on a sacred trust. Jed wore his wedding clothes with the awkwardness of a man more comfortable in work boots than polished shoes. But his eyes were steady when he looked at Ava, sure of the choice he was making, certain of the future they would build together. The judge spoke words that had been said at countless weddings, words that somehow felt new when spoken over two people who had found each other through circumstances that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with need. When the time came for vows, Tobias stepped forward. He spoke in 9 languages, each promise translated into words that represented different cultures, different ways of understanding love and commitment and the bonds that held families together. The wedding guests listened in amazement, heard a child speak promises in tongues that most of them had never encountered, that opened their minds to possibilities they had not considered. Mrs. Hutchins wept openly. Buck removed his hat and held it over his heart. The Cherokee scouts who had helped in the canyon stood at respectful attention. The Pinkerton detectives smiled with the satisfaction of men who had seen justice served and love rewarded. When Tobias finished his multilingual vows, Ava and Jed spoke their own promises, simple words that carried the weight of everything they had survived to reach. This moment, everything they hoped to build in the years ahead. The judge pronounced them husband and wife, invited Jed to kiss his bride. The kiss was gentle, brief, appropriate for a ceremony witnessed by their community, but it held depths that only they could measure, promises that only they could understand. The celebration that followed was simple but complete. Food prepared by neighbor women, music provided by ranch hands with guitars and harmonicas, dancing on grass that had been swept clean of stones and debris. Ava danced with her new husband, with Solomon, with Tobias who stood on her feet and let her carry him through steps he had not yet learned, with Buck who blushed and stumbled and apologized for every misstep. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors that spoke of endings and beginnings, Ava found herself standing apart from the celebration, watching the people who had become her community, who had chosen to accept her despite the difficulties her presence might bring. Jed approached her slowly, offered his arm. They walked together toward the house that was now officially hers, that represented safety and belonging and the end of running. 6 months later, Eva stood in the same schoolroom, where Jed had first found her teaching Tobias languages that opened the world. But now the room was filled with children. Mexican children whose parents worked the ranch. Town children whose families had overcome their initial reservations. Cherokee children who came with their parents' blessing to learn from the woman, who respected their culture while teaching others. The school had grown beyond the single room. Jed had built additional space, had created a place where learning could flourish without the constraints of prejudice or limitation, where knowledge was valued for its own sake rather than judged by the color of hands that held it. Tobias served as her assistant. His gift for languages had grown stronger with practice. He moved between students with the patience of someone who understood that teaching was service, that helping others learn was one of the highest callings. Eva caught Jed watching from the doorway, the same doorway where he had first appeared, with his rifle and his suspicions, where fear had given way to understanding, where love had grown from the soil of necessity and bloomed into something neither of them had expected. He smiled when their eyes met. The expression transformed his face, made him look younger, made him look like a man who had found everything he needed and more than he had dared to hope for. Eva placed her hand over the gentle swell of her belly where new life was growing, the child that would be born into a family that had been formed by choice rather than blood, by love rather than obligation, by the understanding that home was something you built rather than something you inherited. She turned back to her students, to the children who represented the future she and Jed were creating together. A future where language was a bridge rather than a barrier, where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where love was stronger than hate and always would be. The afternoon light streamed through windows that faced west toward mountains that had witnessed their struggle and their triumph. The light was golden, warm, full of promise for all the tomorrows that stretched ahead of them. Eva Ironstone began the day's lesson. Her voice carried across the room and beyond, carried the sound of hope made audible, of dreams transformed into reality through courage and determination, and the simple belief that some things were worth fighting for. The fight was over. The building had begun. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.